From lumbering giants and fearsome trolls to impish satyrs and magical elves, mythical creatures have captured imaginations since the dawn of time. Cultures worldwide have passed down tales through the generations and created untold volumes of lore. Even today, legendary beasts and beings continue to captivate us. The mythical creatures found in folklore do a lot of different jobs, says Simon Young, a British historian of folklore and co-editor, co-author of the book Magical Folk, British and Irish Fairies, 500 AD to the present. They uphold morality, enforce taboos, connect to divinity, warn against dangers, and, most importantly, entertain, Young says. If I had to sum it up, though, I'd say they teach us modesty. There are things that are bigger than us that we glimpse and things that we cannot even conceive. Things that are, in any case, beyond our control. They are the unknown. Trolls, fairies, and centaurs. Oh my. A primer on 3 of the most recognizable creatures of legend. Every culture has its own gaggle of monsters and beings residing in traditional tales. Versions of some creatures, such as the prolific fairy, populate stories across multiple cultures and countries. Others, meanwhile, are born to a single region. Places get the monsters they deserve. It is that simple, Young says. A hunter-gatherer community will have bogies connected to the chase. An agricultural community will have monsters on the edge of the village near the fields. Here's a closer look at 3 of the most storied creatures found in myth and lore. Trolls. If contemporary popular culture is to be believed, trolls are small, happy-go-lucky creatures with colourful hair who break into song and dance sporadically. Trolls' roots in Scandinavian folklore, however, tell a different story. In traditional mythology, these monstrous, somewhat humanoid beings were not so cheerful and actually quite hostile. In these stories, they occupied castles, emerging only at night, because exposure to sunlight meant either a horrifying death or a life forever suspended in stone. In other tales, these brutish creatures dwelled in the mountains and boasted overstated facial features that mirrored that of a stereotypical Neanderthal. Still, in different regional stories were trolls who made their homes deep in underground caves. These were described as being even uglier, with stubby limbs, fat bellies, and slime-covered skin from all the time spent below the Earth's surface. There's some disagreement as to whether the trolls of lore were all bad, but they have been described as being perfect thieves, entering homes under a cloak of invisibility to steal food and cause other mischief. If there's one in particular that strikes fear in the hearts of children, however, it's Grýla, the Icelandic troll woman said to terrorize families during the jolliest time of year, Christmas. Stories are told of Grýla descending from her frigid mountain lair every December to snatch up naughty boys and girls and devour them in a stew. Today, trolls have pushed well beyond Norse mythology and Scandinavian folklore and have become recurring characters in fantasy films, literature, role-playing games, and yes, on toy store shelves. But as varied as their origin and evolution may be, the mythos we have created around trolls often touches on the same theme, a fear of those unlike ourselves. Fairies. Even before the term fairy, alternatively spelled fairy or fairy, entered the lexicon during the Middle Ages in Europe, different versions of the creature already existed in tales being passed down in regions around the world in both literature and oral traditions. Greek mythology had its nymphs. Irish folklore told of the leprechaun, an often grumpy, mischief-prone subtype of fairy. Look to the Samoans and indigenous people of the Americas, and you'll find folk characters that bear resemblance to what was, or is, considered a fairy. Many times, fairies, also known as the Fae, wee folk, good folk, or people of peace, were defined as any mystical creature taking a humanoid appearance. But what do you think of when you imagine a fairy? The first image that likely springs to mind is of a diminutive, gossamer-winged sprite, often taking the form of a beautiful woman who uses her magical pixie dust to perform benevolent deeds for humans. While this wholesome representation of fairies commonly populates children's storybooks in modern times, they actually have a darker and more sinister folkloric past. Some traditional stories from England, Ireland, and Scotland, for example, depict these soulless, supernatural beings as wicked, temperamental entities that weren't above murder or kidnapping if you landed on their bad side. They're not always tiny either. Depending on the region, fairies can be the size of a human or even bigger. As some of the fairy legends of Western Europe go, if you come across a fairy ring distinguished by a circle of mushrooms in a field or forest, do not dare step inside. Fairy rings were also believed to be instant portals to the fairy realm, where if you ate or drank anything, you'd be trapped for eternity. And although humans and fairies were allowed to marry, they could only do so under certain conditions. If those conditions were not met, the marriage ended, and sometimes the life of the human would too. Centaurs. Centaurs are a race of creatures from Greek mythology that are part man and part horse, and were said to inhabit the mountains and forests of Thessaly and Arcadia. In the ancient tales, they were notorious for lawless barbarism, with a tendency to overindulge in drink and amorous pursuits. They represented the untamed, unchecked side of mankind. Centaurs are often depicted as supporting forces of good. Although they can still be dangerous and mysterious, they also step up as allies,